it the? Yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah,
right?
this guy's like the most recent one.
Okay, we don't do ad hominems on this show. However, we can objectively talk about his face though. His face and these words. It's just funny.
Yeah.
We can objectively talk about the points though. How about that?
And you know what? That's a good point, man. Because I saw this video, and my takeaway was, look, man, I don't think this is like a bad human being. I'm sure he's like a fine person who, if you saw him at the bar, you could have like a beer with him. I don't think he's like a bad human being. But I saw this, and it's frankly hilarious how amazingly he's missing the point with PulseChain, because his whole thing was, hey man, this is just kind of like a slightly moderately better version of PulseChain, and we've seen how other Ethereum forks kind of died off. But what he fails to realize, which is so obvious that it strains credulity and it calls into question whether he's even arguing in good faith due to how terrible an argument this is and how obvious the rebuttal to this is that the biggest distinguishing factor is the community. The tech does not matter if no one gives a shit. Like, there's objectively faster, cheaper chains out there. There's Solana, there's other ones, right? But they don't have a community. The great thing about this ecosystem, which sets it apart from everyone else and sets it up for success, is the fact that it has a community. In order to kind of, I think, frame this in a way that people outside our ecosystem might better understand, because I remember, man, during the previous cycle, it was so narrative driven. It was DeFi summer, then it was NFTs, there was an AI hype wave, and then there was one or two. There was an Oracle kind of narrative for a little bit, and so often these projects, these tokens, need to rely on a narrative in order to do well, in order to pump. But even meme coins. But in another, if we kind of attempt to frame and understand what a narrative is in a different sense, essentially it's just a hype community who's really excited about it, right? That's essentially what creates a narrative, which is exactly what PulseChain has, except unlike a narrative that's fundamentally dies off over time, or has the potential to die off over time, a fervent community sticks around over the long term. There's a bunch of people here that are in this thing for at least the next 15, 12 years, right? That's what fundamentally sets us apart, which sets us up for success. There's so many other projects who spend millions, tens of millions of dollars trying to get a community and never get it. But we have it day one. We've had it for years. And it speaks, and we're seeing the results of that. There's a reason why PulseChain is number 2 in terms of volume. So I said a lot there, but let me know what you think about that rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, the community is number one for sure. You can have all the VC money in the world, you can fork all the chains, you can build all the best tech, and if nobody uses it, nobody's fervent, nobody's tweeting about it, nobody's making videos. We have the most streamers. We have the most streamers of any crypto. It has to be. There's like 50, 100, 150 streamers in the community about Hex and PulseChain over the last couple of years. It's insane. I mean, the ones that talk about it, they've done more than one video, at least. There's got to be those kind of numbers. Nobody else has stuff like that. Even the big boys, even Ethereum, even Bitcoin, everyone's focused on the tech. You can have the tech, you can have the price performance, and you can have the community. They're not mutually exclusive. And we got all three. So I'd be very interested. Yeah. Do you have any like highlights of like, because I haven't watched this video. So like, what is his actual point? Is it just like, it's another fork, there's no value there? Like what are his major points?
His point is, I don't like our RH centralization, and it's a fork. Like, those are his points. Number one, I don't like RH. Again, I don't have any particular like timestamps we could refer to, but I can attempt to speak to some of the things I heard from memory. One thing that comes to mind that he brought up is kind of the issue with supply, right? And so why don't we take a moment to address that? Because a lot of people say, there's the 670 some odd billion or million, sorry, that was sacked for PulseChain, plus everything that Richard put in. How could this thing ever do any kind of crazy growth? But what you got to understand is that it is not the total supply, it is not the market cap that affects the price, but it is in fact a fraction of the supply. And so let me spell that out. So given the history of the hex origin address and how the hex OA coins don't typically interact with the supply, or he doesn't sell. If we assume something similar is likely to happen to PulseChain, that the PulseChain always supply is likely to not interact with the market, well, then what we really got to consider is the 670 or so million that was sacrificed. That's potential, economic energy that could impact the market. But it is not the entirety of the supply that's interacting with the market at any given day in the liquidity pools. In fact, if you look at other cryptocurrencies, what you see is that there's a great variation between 5 to sometimes even 20% of the supply interacts with the market at any given day. So let's just assume 10%. Well, then it's not really $670 million of economic energy interacting in the market. It's really, 10% of that, 667 million potentially. So my point is, it's not the total supply that matters. It's a fraction of a fraction. It's the amount of supply that's in the liquidity pools that determines the price, which again is a fraction of the total supply. So, when people bring up this point, you have to ask yourself if they're even arguing in good faith, because it's so obvious that it's a fraction of the supply that actually impacts the price. And therefore, because that is the situation, it is far more the case for appreciation is far more clear than some lead it to believe, some want to make it seem kind of thing.
If it leads, it bleeds, or if it bleeds, it leads. Yeah. Is it even possible for people to properly evaluate? Like, for example, if he had been around for a couple of years and he saw RH and he saw Hex or anything else, is it possible to even go look at the tech specs and just go and face value and come up with a argument that's not what he said? Is it just like, are we just like lost in this, hey, if you know, if you don't, then you're always going to get it wrong type of thing?
Could you expand on that a bit more?
Yeah. So the people, I don't know how long he's been around RH or the community or Hex. If he knows anything about any of the other projects or RH's mission, even, I'm sure he doesn't know about any of that stuff either, I imagine. Is it even possible to fairly evaluate the crypto just going to, ranking sites or stat sites or going to pulsechain.com? Is it even possible for him to come up with a video about PulseChain not sucking if he just goes on all the face value, not knowing about the OA, not knowing about, the whole mission type of thing? Like, I'm just trying to think, is it possible for him to do a good evaluation, or is this something where it's just like, it's just going to keep happening to us?
I think it is, man. I think these people, the problem, because essentially this guy is just making a version of the same video I've seen 1,000 times, which is they identify a set of risk factors. And then where I think we ultimately disagree is that they say that therefore these particular set of risk factors make this investment product illegitimate. But what they fail to further clarify is that if you take a deep look into any cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, anyone, you can come up with half a dozen set of significant risk factors. The job of an investor is to differentiate exactly what set of risk factors are tolerable and which ones aren't tolerable. Like, I think you to answer your question, you can do this. I know, because I did it. I remember first hearing about Richard Hart and Hex, and this is so embarrassing to mention, but it's truth, back when it first came out. And because at the time I wasn't confident in my own understanding of this market, I was essentially exporting my critical thinking capacity to who I thought were intelligent people in the space. But those people dismissed Richard Hart. And they did so for the reason I just mentioned, which was they essentially had a surface level understanding. They identified a set of risk factors, but what they failed to do is really accurately identify what risk factors are tolerable and which aren't. And so, because I'd listened to people like him with essentially a surface level understanding, I didn't look into Hex further. And it was only until Hex hit, I think it was around 8 cents, like around there, that I started looking again. And I was like, oh my God, Hex had done crazy. It had outperformed everything I was personally invested in. Like the best investment I ever made was Matic Polygon. I got 100x out of that thing. But Hex did even better. And so I was like, oh my God, why is this thing doing so well? I started looking into it. And man, I spent months really, really looking into it, trying to understand the tokenomics, trying to understand the fundamentals, trying to understand the game theory. Me and Messin debated this thing several hours a day for weeks on end for months, because we were really trying to like figure out why the hell is everyone calling this thing a scam. You know, the things I'd seen, I'd heard are maybe concerning, but I couldn't find a smoking gun. And I started reaching out to people within the community. Started watching live streams. I read the layman's white paper, all this stuff. I tried to look into this thing as far as I could, because at that point, what I had come to realize is that it's extremely important, if you want to outperform the market, to get in early before other people. Get into something that's being wrongly dismissed, either due to a false understanding of risk or just being something that people haven't heard about it yet. That's what you got to do to get into an investment product that outperforms the market. And so I was trying to figure out if Hex was that thing. Could Hex be the next, Matic Polygon, the thing that was, wrongly dismissed? Although Matic Polygon at the time was just wrongly dismissed due to just not a whole lot of understanding. Hex was just being wrongly dismissed due to, I think, a surface level understanding. And I never found that smoking gun that made Hex an illegitimate investment product. I think there are risk factors with Hex. And dude, I'm a giant Hex bull. I got 15-year-long stakes. I like Hex quite a lot.
Nice.
But I can very happily admit and articulate the risk factors with Hex. They do exist, risk factors. But in my opinion, the pros outweigh the cons, and the risk factors that do exist do not make this an illegitimate investment product. The risk factors might be outside your risk tolerance, but nothing. I never found the smoking gun that killed this thing, and that's, I think, the thing that differentiates me from some of these people, where we both see the same risk factors. This guy just seems to think those risk factors are legitimate. I disagree. We'll see over time who's right. I think I'll end up being right. But I think hopefully some of what I said makes some kind of sense. You let me know.
No, definitely. I'll just one more point on it too. I just want to ask, what do you think people need to see in order to be more informed and to see what you've seen, see what I see what a lot of people see? What do they need to see? RH's old videos, his new videos? Do they need to look at the price chart and click log? Like, what is it that they need to see that can get them over the hump after they have some problem with the supply or the OA or all these, things you talked about, the risks, but the pros outweigh the con. And if you know RH's mission, you understand what he's trying to do. Like, what do they need to see to not make more videos like this, or to make, you never know. Maybe Jerry is going to be a Hexagon one day. We welcome him aboard. He'll make a new video saying, he changed his mind. But what do people need to see to really get this ecosystem?
So it's really, really different for everyone, because different people have different risk tolerances. What I can say is that I think the attitude I had that led me to my conclusions, where you really want to try and kill the thing you love. And if you fail at doing so, then maybe it's a solid thing worth investing in. Like I for one do really, really love delving into the risk factors and learning about the risk factors, because if you can confidently identify exactly what all the risk factors are and understand that in anything there's risk factors, just because there's risk factors doesn't mean it's illegitimate, and perhaps just makes it more volatile. You got to have other understandings in order to mitigate the risk, yada yada yada. But essentially, I think for me, if you can understand the risk factors and then if then you come to the conclusion that none of these risk factors make it illegitimate, I think perhaps having that attitude is what can give you confidence, right? But but then there's the issue with this guy, where he considers the risk factors and he sees it as illegitimate. I'm through speaking out loud here, I'm trying to understand exactly kind of what the differentiating factor is, and I think one needs to. I think there is an element here of the ethereal that's difficult to conceptualize, in the sense that you need to have an above average level of insight of what you're interested in outperforming the market. Because if you're not interested in outperforming the market, then Bitcoin and Ethereum are fine for you. And that's what this guy talks about. Like he went on to say that, things like Bitcoin and Ethereum are the safest. Meme coins, have one pump and dump and then they never come back. He's not interested in outperforming the market. He's a guy who likes these safe things, Bitcoin and Ethereum. Good for you. But if you are interested in outperforming the market, you need to go and look for those things that are wrongly dismissed, and you need to develop an understanding of what sets of factors makes this thing that's dismissed for whatever reason either illegitimate or legitimate. And with Hex, I think the factors ultimately make Hex a legitimate investment, whereas with other ones, the risk factors were perhaps too high. Like, for example, when I was looking at my, trying to find new lookup gems of the week, back in the day when I first started my first YouTube channel, I was essentially looking at a lot of wildly unproven ideas, no community, hoping and praying that with enough development, enough roadmap, we might get developers, we might get users. But that was ultimately an open question. And in retrospect, the degree to which getting developers, getting users is an open question, the larger that open question is, the more perhaps illegitimate of an investment it is. But if you look at something like PulseChain, there's already so many developers, so many users kind of already waiting to use this chain that it greatly mitigates that risk factor. And I think, therefore, it crosses the threshold of this being an acceptable risk to undertake.
I think
let me know if that makes any sense.
Just on that, I think the simplest thing to look at is there's so many people with so much money and time invested in the last 2 years to make this thing successful. It will be willed successful in my mind. Like, the will of the people will happen. There's too many people with too much money, too much projects. And, of course, again, if you don't know RH's mission, search my channel. I've talked about it a million times of glory and winning and what he wants to do in the world, longevity, all that stuff. Combine that strong foundations, base, billionaire genius founder with community who is satisfied with nothing but winning. And to me, it's like, how can we lose? That's the way I look at it.